Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie. This is episode number 1045 for February 25th, 2024. Coming up in a few minutes.
I'm not a big fan of age statements. I think it's at least not the way we make our whiskies at the moment. We blend for taste without trying to be too constrained by age. Whether when we get to a 10-year-old, we'll release a 10-year-old, who knows, but it's not on the immediate horizon.
Scotland's Nc'Nean Distillery celebrates its 7th anniversary of production next month. The distillery takes a unique approach to organic production and sustainability. I'll talk with founder Annabel Thomas later on WhiskyCast In-Depth, and she'll answer some of your questions too. That's just ahead, along with the What I'm Tasting This Week department, Behind the Label, and much more. The news is next on this week's WhiskyCast.
Hey everyone, it's me, Gabriel Cardarello with yours, and I'm here to introduce you to something very special. We've gone and blended the time-honored whiskey craftsmanship of Scotland with the whiskey-making finesse of Japan. And let me tell you, it's something truly remarkable. More on that in a minute.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast. The average college basketball power forward is 6'9", which, according to my rough calculations, is 16.5 times my height. I'll stick to aimlessly pottering around in back gardens.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast, Redbreast. Pass it on.
Let's get started with the news. It's brought to you by the Dalmore. We'll start with an update on last week's story about the founder of Bimber and Dunphail distilleries. Dariusz Plaszewski is facing extradition to his native Poland on charges of conspiracy to commit murder 20 years ago when he fled to the UK and changed his name. Plaszewski has now relinquished all of his responsibilities for both distilleries to his colleagues. Bimber co-founder Evelina Kruszczyk and Dunphail director of whiskey creation Matt McKay will lead the operations of both distilleries going forward. While the legal battle between Kentucky state regulators and Justin's House of Bourbon continues to play out in court, state lawmakers are working to close loopholes in the Kentucky Vintage Distilled Spirits law. The Lexington Herald-Leader reports a bill pending in the State House would limit the amount of bottles a person can sell in a year to a licensed bar, restaurant, or retailer to 24. Currently, there is no limit. The newspaper found some individuals have been selling hundreds of bottles of Pappy Van Winkle, Blanton's, Weller, and other highly sought-after bottles to retailers. The legislation would also require retailers and bars to get a special license to buy and sell vintage spirits and submit monthly reports to the state ABC. British Chancellor Jeremy Hunt is preparing to give his spring budget address to Parliament, and Scotch whisky industry leaders are calling for a tax cut on spirits. Last year's spring budget included a 10.1% excise duty increase, which has been blamed for cutting into tax revenues and causing inflation. The Scotch Whisky Association has released a report indicating that a 5% cut in duty would generate £318 million of additional revenue annually for the government. The UK has the highest rate of excise duty in the G7 developed countries. Pernod Ricard is expanding its distillery operations in India. The No. 2 spirits company has signed a memorandum of understanding with the Maharashtra state government for a new distillery in Nagpur. The project will take at least 3 years to complete and will produce all of Pernod Ricard's Indian whiskey brands, including the Longitude 77 Indian single malt. There's a change in the executive suite at Douglas Lang & Company. Cara Lang, the daughter of company chairman Fred Lang, has been named managing director. She had previously been the company's director of whiskey. The move comes as Douglas Lang celebrates its 75th anniversary with a diamond series of single cask releases, including a 40-year-old Port Ellen and a 45-year-old Cameron Bridge single grain. The series also includes a King of Scots 50-year-old limited edition. King of Scots was the first whiskey in the company's portfolio when Cara's grandfather founded the company in 1948. Other new whiskeys of note: the Glenlivet is out with a new fusion cask expression that takes finishing to a new level. It's done in specially built casks that includes wood from both first-filled bourbon and rum barrels. The Glenlivet's coopers took the heads from bourbon barrels and mated them to rum barrel staves, while taking the rum barrel heads and mating those to bourbon staves. The fusion cask will carry a recommended retail price in the U.S. of $99.99 a bottle. The Glenturret is expanding on its relationship with Jaguar, with a special whiskey celebrating the 70th anniversary of the legendary C-Type Jaguar. The whiskey comes from 5 casks, all at least 32 years old. Only 220 bottles will be available through the Glenturret website at a price tag of £2,200 each. Diageo's Roe & Co. distillery has released the first whiskey made with its own distillate from the distillery in Dublin. It's an Irish single malt matured with Solera-style maturation, using a combination of ex-bourbon, ex-sherry, virgin American oak, and chestnut barrels. It'll be available at Dublin's airport shops starting in March, with a price tag of €85 a bottle. Killowen Distillery is releasing 3 new whiskeys. The signature rum and raisin 5-year-old single malt uses a combination of rum and PX sherry casks, while the coconut rum and raisin 5-year-old uses West Indies coconut rum casks instead. There's also a white cognac cask single pot still Irish whiskey that was matured in a single cask initially used for Hennessy pure white cognac. Prices range from $77 to $115 a bottle. With the Formula One season about to get underway, Jack Daniel's is releasing the second annual limited edition bottle to mark its partnership with McLaren Racing. It'll be available in most markets with F1 races starting next month. In the UK, it carries a price tag of £34.95 a bottle. And 2024 marks a change for Compass Box's first whiskey. The Hedonism Blended Grain Scotch becomes an annual limited edition release starting this year. The company has been having problems sourcing aged grain whiskeys to use in Hedonism, so this is the best option for keeping the label going. This year's release includes artwork by Scottish artist Stephanie Rue on the label and carries a $150 price tag in the U.S. You can keep up on the latest whiskey news all week long at WhiskyCast.com and in the WhiskyCast community app. The news is brought to you by the Dalmore.
Hello, Richard Patterson here, Master Distiller, Master Blender for the Dalmore. You know, whenever the team and I are in the world sharing our exceptional single malt, we like to keep in touch with Mark Gillespie and the latest news from WhiskyCast.
Let's check the calendar now and see what's happening around the world of whiskey. First off, the Kentucky Bourbon Festival has announced that tickets for this September's event will go on sale starting April 17th. Details are available at the festival website. The folks from Heaven Hill are staging a bar takeover at Bourbon's Bistro in Louisville Wednesday night, with drink specials and tastings during the evening. Julio's Liquors in Westboro, Massachusetts, celebrates its annual Go Whiskey Week this week with special events all week long. Tickets are still available for the Whiskey Exchange's tasting tour stop in Bristol, England, coming up on March 6th. The Kensington Wine Market in Calgary, Alberta, has its Lassie's Only Whiskey Festival March 8th. Ohio's Pickaway County Visitors Bureau hosts the Pickaway Pour Bourbon Affair on the 9th in Mount Sterling, Ohio. The New Jersey Whiskey Classic is March 14th in Morristown, New Jersey, and the Drinkmonger Spirits Festival is in Edinburgh, Scotland, March 22nd and 23rd. That same weekend is Whiskey Live London and the Cork Whiskey Fest in Cork, Ireland. If you're organizing a whiskey event, let us know about it. We'll add it to the calendars at WhiskyCast.com and in the WhiskyCast community app.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Kentucky and Ireland have plenty in common. 2 homes of horse racing. Bluegrass music is said to have Irish roots. Okay, it's not the longest list, but the Redbreast Kentucky Oak Edition only strengthens the bond. Finished in sustainably sourced Kentucky oak for a captivating nose and round taste. I see a triple crown in this thoroughbred's future.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
WhiskyCast In-Depth is brought to you by Mortlock and the Classic Malts lineup. The first drops of spirit flowed off of the stills at Scotland's Nc'Nean Distillery 7 years ago next month. The distillery is unusual in that it celebrated sustainability from day one, using renewable energy to power the facility and recycled glass for its bottles. It's one of a handful of distilleries worldwide to be granted B Corp status for its commitment to sustainability. Annabel Thomas is Nc'Nean's founder and was in New York City this week to launch Nc'Nean's whiskeys in the New York area. We talked after dinner at the launch. First of all, 7 years in now in actual production since you started distilling whiskey. What have you learned?
Oh, what have I not learned? The good bits that I've learned are the massive impact that all of those different interesting bits of spirit production can have on the final output, both when it comes off the still but also post-maturation. I've learned it's a very competitive industry. I've learned how important people are, both to our business but also within the industry, how important relationships are, what a friendly place it is. I think I've also learned that people appreciate what we're trying to do, which is a nice place to be.
A lot different than working for Bain Capital.
Yeah, Bain & Co, thankfully, not Bain Capital. Marginally indifferent, but very different all the same. Very, very different.
But that was a different transition for you coming out of the finance world, right?
Yeah, it was bonkers. I mean, I guess I honestly never thought I'd be doing it 10 years later. I don't know what I did think I'd be doing. But I've taken it chunk by chunk, and I think psychologically that was, at least for me, quite important. I'm going to raise the money, then I'm going to build it, then we're going to produce a bit, and then we're going to make whiskey. And I think taking it 2 or 3 years at a time is more manageable, at least from my point of view, than thinking 10 years ahead, and that becomes a bit overwhelming.
Now, you told the story earlier tonight at dinner about the origin of the name Nc'Nean. I want you to tell us that again, because that has caused some questions about, well, one, how do you pronounce it, but also what is it?
Okay, perfect. So the origin, I didn't want to call Nc'Nean the name of the place, which is Nc'Nean, because I felt like that's kind of a traditional approach, but it doesn't really mean anything either, and I wanted something that summed up our mission rather than just the place. So we looked back in Gaelic history and we found this ancient goddess, Nc'Nean, who was known as a protector of nature and for walking her own path, and we thought that so perfectly summed up what we were trying to do, that we wanted to use her as a kind of symbol for our whiskey. However, Nc'Nean has got 13 letters, lots of consonants, unspellable, unpronounceable, definitely untypable by me 20 times a day. So we shortened it down to Nc'Nean. And I have to say, it didn't occur to me when we first named it Nc'Nean that people would find it so hard to pronounce, but I mean, that's part of the problem of being on the inside of a business. But the fun fact is that Nook is the female equivalent of Mook. So Mook Donald, Mook means son of Donald, Nook means daughter of.
Interesting. Tell me about getting the B Corp certification for Nc'Nean.
Yeah, so that's been quite a journey. I must have first found out about B Corp maybe back in probably 2017, 2018, I want to say. And I was just, it really spoke to me. I was like, back at that point, you know, it's an originally American thing. It was just coming over to the UK at that time. And I thought, wow, that is amazing. That is so, I always liken it to kind of organic certification, but for the whole company. You're doing the right thing at a whole company level, and I thought that's just something I want to aim for. It took us a couple of bites of the cherry for various reasons, but we finally got our full application in COVID. So in 2020, there was a massive backlog at that point, and we eventually certified in Jan 22. And I think the really cool thing about B Corp is that it's not about proving a point. It's not about saying we're great. It's about continuous improvement, and even the process of getting the certification has helped us do things better. And once you've got the certification, you have to recertify every 3 years and show improvement. And I think that's just a really positive force in a corporate climate.
That brings us to our first listener question from Ian Bruce. To obtain and keep that certification, what does it require in terms of having the measures in place to keep everything organic and sustainable?
It definitely requires us to do that, but what's great is it requires us to do even more than that. So we're always going to be organic, we're always going to try and be as sustainable as possible and do more than that, but it also requires us to think about governance, diversity, local suppliers, how we treat our people, and all of these quite diverse range of things. And it requires us to improve on that in every 3-year cycle, which I just think is a massively positive thing for a company to need to do.
Ian's second question is about the bottles that you have, which are uniquely attractive. How did this design come about? And I know these are all recycled glass, right?
Well, as with many of these things, it now appears a foregone conclusion, but it was a very long, iterative, and not necessarily predestined process. So back in 2019, we'd actually started on a search early in 2019 for recycled glass and found none. And we'd started to design our whiskey bottles on a normal bottle. And then Amy, who's our head of sustainability, and had been doing a lot of work on this glass sourcing. And I went to Bar Convent Berlin in autumn 2019. And there was this enormous stand at this trade show. 100% recycled glass is the line across the top. And I looked at Amy, I was like, how have you not managed to find this? Anyway, turned out that was their launch day. So she hadn't managed to find it because it was the launch day. So we ditched the previous bottle, we ditched all the design work we'd done, and we adopted what is now our bottle in 100% recycled glass. And I think once you've got a shape, and it's quite a distinctive shape, there's not that many whiskies in this shape. And we then really just wanted to layer on kind of our brand, something that was aesthetically evocative of what we're trying to do. And we'd already had a lot of the illustrations that you see on the bottle done. And I mean, we went through loads of iterations, but we just loved this eventual result. So
you made a commitment early on to using organic barley, even though it's a lot more expensive. Why?
Well, the simple answer is because I think it's the right thing to do. The longer answer is I think it's easy in any company to focus on the things that you control. So in our case, the way we distill, the energy that we use, the packaging that we source. And it's easy to forget about the impact your supply chain has. And for whiskey, at least, that barley is such a key part of, it's a key part of the product as well. But it's, agriculture, as we all know now, it has a huge impact on the planet. And I just felt it was really important that we could source the most kind of verifiably sustainable barley that we could. And that was Scottish organic barley.
What does it add to the whiskey, though?
Well, this was an unexpected bonus. I like to think it's karma, because I honestly did not consider the taste implications because I didn't know there would be any. But I think but now we know, and you can actually taste it. If you just taste the malted barley versus other malted barley, you can taste the difference at the pre-mashing stage. But I also liken it, if you've ever tasted an organic carrot, it's kind of carrotier than a non-organic carrot. And the same is true for the barley. Those grains of barley have had to grow without the aid of fertilizers and without the aid of pesticides. That means that the soil is much richer and basically more goodness gets into those grains of barley, and that translates through to the whiskey. And I think the most obvious way you can taste it is in the texture and the butteriness and the viscosity of the whiskey. That was a very long answer, sorry.
No, that's fine. I'm just curious how you keep the entire process organic, since it's hard to certify organic casks.
We don't have to have organic casks. That is counted as a packaging it's not an ingredient.
Okay, because I know when Ben Romick started doing organic, they were told they had to have organic casks and had a hard time with that. So I'm curious about this.
Well, I think honestly it's a grey area, probably is the honest answer. it's not defined in the regulations because there are very few organic products, full stop, that use casks. But there are certain things we have to conform to. Like, they can't have anything in them. That's part of the Scotch regulations anyway. But yeah, I have been told that some people have said they have to use new oak only, which to me would have been that probably would have been a red line I wouldn't have crossed, because I think for me new oak is not the right cask for our spirit. But yeah, the STR casks that we use are recharred anyway, so that's got no original ingredient in it, if you like. But the ex-bourbon casks we use have not had necessarily organic bourbon in them.
You mentioned STR casks. Of course, that was the creation of the great Dr. Jim Swan. Tell me what influence Jim had on you guys.
Oh, enormous. In fact, Jim was on board with the project before I even left Bain. So he was so critical. You know, I don't come from a whiskey background, and for us to have someone who could give both us, but also, frankly, our investors, the reassurance that we can make fantastic whiskey was essential. We would not exist without Jim Swan. It was pretty devastating that he left us, full stop, especially for us. He left us when he did. We were 2 weeks away from our first run of spirit, but I feel very, very lucky that he helped us kind of with everything, honestly, that we needed to know up until that point. We'd done all of the recipe design, we'd done all of the equipment design, we'd done all of the sourcing, and I feel like what we made was very much what he would have wanted. I think the bit... So, you know, for the first 3 years, that's what we were doing. We were making great spirit and we were laying it down in great barrels that he'd helped us source. The trickiest bit was actually when it came to starting to think about releasing it, because he would have been our blender, or at least our master blender. And we kind of suddenly had this void, and I was super lucky that Matt, who's our now blender, joined us very early in 2020 and took on that role. But I remember feeling a lot of trepidation in 2019 when there was this kind of great gaping hole in the organisation without Jim in it.
Let's turn to another listener question now from Garrett Pitcher. What renewable energy sources look realistic both in terms of capital expenditure and operating expenses for distilleries in the next 10 years? You use biomass for your boiler, right?
Yeah, correct. And I think I always say this about energy. It depends entirely on where the distillery is located. So we have a commercial forest right next to us, which means it's both economic and sustainable to use it. You know, if you're on Islay, where there are very few trees, that would be madness. I think looking forwards, there's a lot of interesting work going on in hydrogen. There's still quite a lot of work to be done there, I think, but that's definitely got potential. There are more distilleries using biomass now, and I think that's great to see within Scotland. It doesn't necessarily make sense everywhere. But there's also really, really interesting work going on in effectively electric-only distilleries. And there's a couple of those, I think, due to come online in Scotland within the next couple of years, and I'm going to be fascinated to see them.
Let's go to another listener question now from Doc Martin. Your current organic single malt does not have an age statement. Are you thinking about releasing one with an age statement in the future?
What I would really like is to be able to be totally transparent about what is in the bottle, and then there will be no need for age statements. I would like to be able to tell you this is 6% 6-year-old, 15% 7-year-old, and whatever else 4-year-old. I'm not a big fan of age statements. I think it's at least not the way we make our whiskies at the moment. We blend for taste without trying to be too constrained by age. Whether when we get to a 10-year-old, we'll release a 10-year-old, who knows? But it's not on the immediate horizon.
Doc also asks if you're going to be releasing your experimental whiskeys in the U.S., along with your botanical spirit.
Experimental whiskeys, definitely. So Huntress is our spring release, is where we put most of our experimental spirits, and Huntress 24 will definitely be coming to the US. This year is a really cool one as well. It's casks from 1 week a year where we transition between two different spirit recipes, and it creates this unbelievable distillate. So I'm really excited about that. Our botanical spirit is currently in 50 CLs, so it's not legal in the US, but we're working on a project to move it to 70s where it will be legal in the US, and then definitely it will come here, but it might be up to 2 years before that works its way through the whole system.
Did the U.S. decision a couple of years ago to legalize 700 ml bottles make it easier for you to import into the U.S.?
I mean, not easier, possible. I don't think we'd be here if it was still 750s, because our bottles are printed, which means the batch size is huge. And I'm not sure that type of bottle even exists in 750. If we'd had to do a bespoke batch in 750 that was printed, it would have been economically unviable, I think. So it was massive for us.
How important was it to you to get into the U.S. market, given that we appear to be at an inflection point in the Scotch whiskey boom?
Well, good question. I think I'll have to tell you that in about 5 years' time. But in principle, it's always been an important market. I think there's a lot of appreciation of what we do in this market. But whether that's the right decision or not, I'll know in a few years.
Are you worried at all when you see Scotch whiskey export numbers to the U.S. dropping and sales dropping?
Honestly, no, not at this stage. We are very small. The market is enormous. And I think that the positive trends that you see within those numbers, which are obviously really high-level numbers, are as a swing towards more of what we're doing rather than away from it.
How are you going to define success 5-10 years from now?
Selling everything we make, and more generally and philosophically, if the whole Scotch industry has moved towards a more sustainable model.
Are you hoping to be a role model?
Oh, definitely. And I would like to say we already are. There are lots of distilleries, some of whom come in secret, some of whom come very openly to see what we're doing. We publish a sustainability report every year, which is intending to share what we do, and a lot of the trade will read that. And I hope that by demonstrating that it's A, possible, and that B, consumers care, that's another motivation for people to move in the right direction. Now, that's not to say it's easy, and I know we had a big advantage, right? We're a new distillery. You can start from scratch, you start from a blank piece of paper. It's not easy for the bigger old distilleries to retrofit, but at least things like packaging, which are easier to change, hopefully people are moving more quickly as a result.
Do you think consumers really care?
I don't think all consumers care, but some consumers really care. And that's enough. As long as some consumers really care, that's enough for us as a business, but hopefully it's also enough for the planet, which is ultimately the deciding factor in all of this.
Thanks to Nc'Nean's Annabel Thomas for joining us this week on WhiskyCast In-Depth. It's brought to you by Mortlach, whiskey's best-kept secret. Hidden away for decades in some of the world's most famous Scotch whiskies, comes a single malt inspired by an original for a fortunate few. Discover the entire Mortlach lineup at malts.com. Let's start the What I'm Tasting This Week department with the flagship Nc'Nean single malt. It's bottled at 46% ABV. The nose is fruity and floral with a touch of maltiness and hints of peaches, apricots, and honey. The taste is peppery and tart with white pepper spice, balanced by barley sugar, stone fruits, honey, and vanilla. The finish, long and fruity with just a hint of spice. I'm scoring the Nc'Nean Organic Single Malt a 92. Now, Annabel Thomas refers to her team as Quiet Rebels, and each year, based on seniority, picks one to create their own Quiet Rebels bottling. The latest release was created by distillery manager Gordon Wood and includes STR wine casks as well as reef salt wine casks in the blend. It's bottled at 48.5% ABV, and the nose has touches of creme brulee, plums, apricots, and orange marmalade. The taste is thick and creamy with notes of white pepper, plums, vanilla, orange marmalade, and honey. The finish is long and fruity with underlying spices, and I'm scoring the Quiet Rebels Gordon release from Nc'Nean a 93. Finally, British Columbia's Shelter Point Distillery is one of the few Canadian single malt distillers that's old enough to produce a 12-year-old expression. I received a sample the other day. It's bottled at 46% ABV. The nose has a honey and barley sugar sweetness, along with dried flowers and a hint of citrus. The taste is malty with barley sugar sweetness and a touch of allspice, along with honey, caramel candy, and hints of plums and raisins. Those fruity hints carry over to the long, subtle finish. I'm scoring the Shelter Point 12-year-old Canadian single malt a 92. I'll be adding these tasting notes to our searchable list of more than 3,600 different whiskeys from all over the world. Check it out this week at WhiskyCast.com.
Dewar's has truly been innovative in perfecting cask finishing, which has led to exceptional expressions of our craftsmanship. This extra step allows our whiskey to further mature in carefully selected casks and marks the final stage of our double aging process, or in Dewar's case, our double aging method, resulting in unique, indulgent tasting experiences. The new Dewar's Double 21-year Mizunara oak cask finish undergoes a meticulous 4-stage aging process, including being finished in sought-after Japanese Mizunara oak casks. Crafting these casks is challenging due to the non-straight growth of Mizunara oak, and it takes 200 years for these trees to reach full potential. The result, a masterfully balanced whiskey with notes of sandalwood, coconut, and creamy vanilla, to name a few. And while it's not the easiest to find, it's an unmissable experience.
Let's open up the WhiskyCast community app and see what people are talking about this week. Our community segment is brought to you by Waterford Whisky. Heard from former Diageo Senior Master of Whiskey Steve Beale after last week's interview with Bullet Master blender Andrew McKay. Nice job on the Bullet ASM. It's pretty fine whiskey. I have enjoyed this discussion. As always, the critics and the second-guessers are out in force, and the whiskey conspiracy theorists are, as usual, totally stuck in their rabbit holes. This whiskey is really brilliant, tastes great, and is, drumroll, affordable. Andrew McKay is an amazing blender as well as a really great human being. Your professional approach is the main reason why I love WhiskyCast. Thank you, Steve. I appreciate it. Then there's this comment on Instagram from Workhorse Rye. Oh, but it's Frontier Single Malt. Damn, our industry is 99.9% smoke and mirrors. It's all dressed up industrial grains. So boring. I've got news for you. Whiskey distilleries are really just small chemical plants. And when you look at it that way, whiskey is all dressed up industrial grains. But man, does it taste good. If you have something you'd like to share with whiskey lovers around the world, share it with us on the WhiskyCast community app. Download it today from the iOS or Android app stores and join the conversation. You can also find us on Threads, X, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast, and our email address is comments@whiskycast.com. Our community segment is brought to you by Waterford Whisky on the web at waterfordwhisky.com.
100 individual farms of Irish barley, separately harvested, malted, fermented, distilled and matured. Is that too much effort? Perhaps. Unless you're interested in flavour above all else. Waterford Whisky, the most naturally flavoursome single malt.
Let's close out the show now with Behind the Label, our look at the history, science, and people who make whiskey unique. It's brought to you by Balcones Distilling. Last time around, I talked about the history of wooden stills, and at the end I said, wonder what the spirits from those stills would have tasted like. Well, it didn't take long for Richard to post this in the WhiskyCast community app. I'm not sure if you are aware, but the El Dorado Estates Rum Distillery Group in Guyana still has 3 wooden stills in active production. One from the old Port Morant estate and is a double wooden pot still, also a single wooden pot still from the Versailles estate. The third is from the old Enmore Sugar estate and is a wooden continuous coffee still. From their website, quote, it is similar if not identical to the very first continuous still constructed and patented by Irish excise officer Aeneas Coffey in 1832. All are nearly 200 years old and still in operation. While primarily used for blending, you can still get some single-source distillate bottles from El Dorado from time to time, which are exclusively from each of these stills. They make the claim that these are the only 3 functional wooden stills in the world. Thank you for sharing that, Richard. I learn something new every day. If you have something you'd like us to look at on an upcoming episode, just get in touch with us. Behind the Label is brought to you by Balcones Distilling, the original Texas whiskey at the forefront of the American single malt movement, exploring place and provenance with unique style whiskeys, ranging from the award-winning Texas One and Lineage American single malts to their Baby Blue straight corn whiskey and Texas Rye bottled in bond. Discover whiskey from a new perspective at balconesdistilling.com. That's all for this week's episode of WhiskyCast. You'll find links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskycast.com. That's also where you'll find the latest whiskey news, my tasting notes, the calendar of events, the whiskey photo of the week, and of course a complete archive of past episodes going all the way back to 2005. Get in touch with us on X, Threads, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast, or you can use the WhiskyCast community app. Download it today from the Apple and Google App Stores. Our email address is comments@whiskycast.com.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
A thoughtful gift is hard work. What you need is a go-to multi-purpose gift for all occasions. A bottle of Redbreast can say, "Enjoy every minute, they grow up so fast." Oh. And equally nails, "Apologies for the back pain, I should have just hired a moving company."
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
Dewar's Double 21-year-old Mizunara Oak Cask Finish is like a worldly whiskey adventure you simply can't miss. Courtesy of your friends at Dewar's. Savor it responsibly. Copyright 2024, Dewar's Blended Scotch Whiskey, 46% alcohol by volume.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2024. And comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.